We're going to go ahead and start the press conference. I want to start by welcoming everyone. First off, Happy New Year to all of you who we have not had a chance to see yet. I hope it's been a great beginning of the new year for everyone. We got a lot of work ahead of us. But for purposes of today's press conference, I'd like to say that today marks the end of the 10-year anniversary of the South Carolina Human Trafficking Task Force. After a decade of combating this crime, human trafficking continues to impact communities across South Carolina. However, the impact of this task force and the growth of the anti-human trafficking effort in South Carolina is remarkable. In 2022, we saw a substantial increase in reports of labor trafficking and the number of children identified as sex trafficking victims. The crimes remain varied and multifaceted. Regardless of the context of these crimes, those who commit these offenses are targeting the most vulnerable among us. Given the complexities of human trafficking cases, the South Carolina Human Trafficking Task Force takes a strategic and multidisciplinary approach to this crime. The task force is currently comprised of 11 mandated member agencies, many are represented here today, 2 appointed non-governmental organizations, nearly 800 individual members, which is an increase of 200 members since last year. It has 12 regional subcommittees, an advisory council, 12 subcommittees on the task force, and 9 regional subcommittees around the state to include an advisory council. The people standing with me today are representatives of these groups from across the state of South Carolina. Also standing with us today are Senator Katrina Shealy, representatives of state partnerships, state, federal, and local law enforcement representatives, as well as prosecutors. It takes the work of each person on the team to see the changes we are acknowledging in 2022 and over the last 10 years. Now I would like to invite First Lady Peggy McMaster to make a presentation on behalf of the Governor's Office. Ms. Peggy?
Okay. I would like to thank all the members of the South Carolina Human Trafficking Task Force for their valiant efforts over the past decade. In my support of this cause, I recognize the importance of bringing awareness to our communities across the entire state. The Governor has proclaimed January 2023 as Human Trafficking Awareness Month in South Carolina. Henry and I encourage all South Carolinians to recognize your important role in helping prevent these crimes. Together, we can protect the vulnerable and eliminate the traumatic impact of human trafficking on our people and our communities. Thank you again for your commitment and hard work.
Thank you, First Lady. We appreciate your partnership and always being here. Every time we call you, you come, and that's not lost on the members of this task force. The state task force received its first financial appropriation from the South Carolina General Assembly in 2022. For the first time, my office is positioned to implement a strategic response plan throughout the state and lead efforts to formalize bylaws for regional task forces and task force subcommittees. Additionally, it is positioned to provide oversight of the standard of care and provide education to many sectors that serve victims of human trafficking. This funding has allowed the task force to increase our staff. The roles were created to align with the task force strategic response plan that aims to prevent crime, improve response throughout South Carolina, and hold perpetrators of this crime accountable. Catherine Moorhead, who is standing right here, I call her my chief cat herder. She is the director of this task force, is beginning her 7th year in this role, and now has a deputy director, Monique Garvin, who will support expanding efforts across the state. There's Monique right up here on the front row. Didn't think you weren't going to get called out. Recently, 4 program coordinators were onboarded to provide support to regional task force and state subcommittees. We welcome with us today, please raise your hand so that they can see who you are. Mandy Bowden, who will be our Midlands region coordinator. Aria Rejmi, our upstate coordinator. Nikki Brown, the PD coordinator, and James Massey, Low Country. We also welcome Abby Zilch, program assistant over communications for the task force. Assistant Attorney General Megan Raymer, she's in the back. She's in the back. Has transitioned to the new human trafficking prosecutor position to work cases and assist the task force with training and prosecution outreach. We will also be hiring an investigator and a victim advocate to support the prosecution of these complex cases. Finally, we're in the process of hiring several staff who will do statistical analysis, work with children, and promote educational initiatives across the state. With this growth, the coming years will undoubtedly see an increase in awareness and better responses to the needs of victims and survivors in South Carolina. In order for the task force to be effective, we must be able to measure the magnitude of human trafficking in our state. The statistics provided do not represent a comprehensive report of human trafficking in South Carolina, and with a new statistical analysis position, we plan to more aggressively collect and share data starting in 2023. The task force currently uses data from several sources: the National Human Trafficking Hotline, state and federal courts, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, you'll hear from our chief here in a moment, the Department of Social Services. In 2021, the task force set out to bring increased awareness and grow the response to labor trafficking cases, prevention education, and service provision. In 2022, South Carolina saw a 128% increase in the use of the national hotline. It's pretty impressive. The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division continues to lead the State Task Force Law Enforcement Subcommittee in efforts to investigate human trafficking cases on behalf of both the Governor's Office and myself. They also provide technical assistance and manpower to other law enforcement agencies. We could not do what we do without the support of SLED. Lieutenant Jade Roy leads the Human Trafficking Unit at SLED, and alongside Captain Connie Sonnefeld serves as co-chair of the Law Enforcement Subcommittee on the State Task Force. The SLED Human Trafficking Unit was involved in 416 cases related to human trafficking in 2022. With the leadership of Captain Sonnefeld and Lieutenant Roy, I don't know if they're here today. If they are, I'd love them. Are they Barry in the back? The phalanx of... Oh, right there. There you are, Connie. I'm sorry. Make sure you guys raise your hand if I call your name out. Along with the work of special agents Logan Fye and Roshani Parikh, excuse me, I don't mispronounce that, and a now growing unit, we have seen an increase in collaboration between local, state, and federal law enforcement, state child welfare agencies, would be like DSS, DMH, DJJ, service providers, and regional task forces from throughout the state. I am proud to have my good friend, my colleague, and another leader in our state, Chief Mark Kill, who is standing with me today. Chief Kill will share a few words about his agency's work in the anti-human trafficking efforts. Chief? Thank you.
Thank you, General. Just like our partners here today, I got into law enforcement 45 years ago because I wanted to help people. I wanted to make a difference. The impact of human trafficking has on our state is tremendous. Our resolve to help victims and bring criminals to justice is unwavering. Raising awareness of human trafficking is crucial, and we need everyone working together to help fight human trafficking. I want to thank our partners, Department of Social Services, Department of Juvenile Justice, Department of Child Advocacy, the State Network of Children's Advocacy Centers, the Attorney General's Office, and our federal partners, and the many other service providers from around the state that are working hard to address these issues. I want to thank the law enforcement agencies around the state for their continued dedication and for bringing those who commit these heinous crimes to justice. Again, as the General has said, I want to thank our SLED human trafficking agents, especially Captain Sonnefeld and Lieutenant Jade Roy and all the agents that work under them. They work tirelessly in this state to investigate those who prey on others. It's important for law enforcement agencies around the state to work with us to investigate the crimes head on. I urge all law enforcement partners to continue working with our state and regional human trafficking task forces to ensure that we are recognized across the state and that South Carolina receives an equal level of law enforcement service no matter what community you live in. With more knowledge and training and understanding of how these crimes are committed, we can better prevent and protect those that are most vulnerable populations of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. In the fall of 2022, we saw a complex prosecution of a juvenile human trafficking case recognized and investigated in Lancaster County, and ultimately the conviction of the trafficker. Standing with me, another good friend and colleague, our Lancaster Sheriff Barry Fell, whose office received the first reports of this case in March of 2020, just as the world was shutting down for COVID. And here's Sheriff Fell right here. I'll make sure you get recognized. Investigator Preston Simpson, with the support of the Sheriff's Office, collaborated with Homeland Security, SLED, and multiple service providers, including the D. Norton Children's Advocacy Center, represented today by Maddie Critchfield Dodds of the Formation Project, to work around the logistical obstacles presented by the pandemic. Prosecutors in my office, Heather Weiss and Jared Fussnecker, where are y'all? Make sure. Everyone's behind me, buried 5 people. Listen, this is a good problem to have when you have this many people. Jared and Heather worked with Lancaster County and the team, including the victim advocate, Juana Ceveda, and investigator Valerie Williams, who are also here today. Their efforts resulted in a conviction on all charges. The defendant is currently serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. I want to thank Sheriff Barry Fell for you and your agency's tireless support. I also want to thank Solicitor Randy Newman, who's the solicitor from that circuit, who trusted my office to prosecute this case. This team brought a successful conclusion to the first human trafficking jury trial in state courts. Every investigation of this magnitude takes many people to reach such positive results, and I would like to thank everyone involved in prosecuting human trafficking in our state. Now I would like to provide you with a few court statistics, and these statistics come from our state court system. In 2022, 10 defendants were charged with human trafficking in South Carolina state courts. Overall, 32 charges of human trafficking were closed in state courts in 2022. As of this report, there are 34 human trafficking cases pending in South Carolina state courts. Our partnership with Polaris, who runs the National Human Trafficking Hotline, positions us to gather and release data each year. The data reflects numbers from 2021, as it takes a year for the data to be properly analyzed. So it's a year behind. I'm now share you with the results of the Polaris National Human Trafficking Hotline. The top 5 counties for reported human trafficking, and there's a new order this year. Here are your top 5 counties. Number 1 is Greenville, 2 Charleston, Richland, Horry, Spartanburg. Now, this data exemplifies the continued effort to raise awareness of trafficking and the hotline throughout our state. Now, I'll put a note here. This is a metric of awareness, not a metric of activity. Oftentimes we get calls from people in local county government saying, are we really that bad? I'm like, no, that's just where the reports are coming from. You could have far more activity in another county, but people aren't making the call. So this is a metric of awareness in that community or that county, not a metric of activity. We don't know what we don't know. So I want to make sure that doesn't mean that those counties where the most human trafficking activity is occurring, that's just where the most people are recognizing it and calling it in. So this can be a positive statistic. There were 124 human trafficking cases reported in South Carolina, up from 121 cases last year. Now, those were cases. I want to talk about victims. The number of victims recorded in South Carolina. There were 277 victims, up from 206 victims last year and 179 victims just 2 years ago. So we're seeing that progress going in that direction. Of those victims, 117 were involved sex trafficking, 132 labor trafficking, 12 both sex and labor trafficking, and 16 were unknown. This is the first time since the data has been recorded that reports of labor trafficking victims were higher than sex trafficking victims. There was a 450% increase in reported victims of labor trafficking in South Carolina. And this is why having good data, good information, and having people there to analyze the data is so important for all of us up here who are stakeholders in this task force. I'm fond, one of my favorite quotes, the Governor McMaster says, you can't manage a problem until you properly measure the problem, and that's why getting that data in is so important. The top 5 identified sex trafficking venues. These would be hotel or motel-based commercial sex, pornography, illicit massage or spa businesses, personal sexual servitude, residence-based commercial sex. The top 5 identified labor trafficking venues, forestry, reforestation, hospitality, manufacturing, factories, landscaping, and then agriculture/farm and animal husbandry. The top 5 methods of recruitment: job offer or an ad, false promise or fraud, intimate partner or marriage proposition, familial, or posing as a benefactor, which goes to the whole, which kind of undercuts this view that all this type of trafficking occurs by people being kidnapped by unknown people. There's usually a relationship or a connection between the trafficking victim and the trafficker. Again, to underscore that, the top 5 recruiter relationships: labor recruiter or contractor, family member, caregiver, intimate partner, employee, friend, acquaintance, or coworker. Again, it's usually someone who knows you. As we've reflected on the data provided by the hotline, we continue to see reports of increased labor and sex trafficking. The increase in the number of calls and reports of both sex and labor trafficking underscores the outreach efforts of this task force. I just want to make sure we have a copy of the annual report, which is being released, I think, as we speak, on our website. So here's a hard copy of the 2022 annual report that has all of the data that I have just talked about in this press conference. You can go to our website, go to the South Carolina Attorney General website, and what is the human trafficking? Is there a...
You can go to humantrafficking.scag.gov.
Yeah, humantrafficking.scag.gov, or just go to our website. You can find it inside the office, and you can get a digital copy of this report. There's also a very brief executive summary of this report. So I would encourage those who are interested in being involved in our task force or being part of the solution to this problem, going to the website, downloading the most updated copy of this report. Again, I want to thank all the members of the state task force, including law enforcement, prosecutors, medical service providers, direct service providers, and others working tirelessly to prevent this horrible crime and meet the needs of victims and survivors in our state. Again, to everyone who took time to be here today, you could have been anywhere else and you chose to be here. This task force is only successful and has only grown because of your support. If you are someone out there in the state who finds yourself in this horrible predicament of being a victim who's currently being trafficked, I want you to look up here right now and look behind me, look to the left and right of me. You are not alone. There is an army of men and women, of agencies and nonprofit organizations ready and willing to help and support you any way that they can to help you get out of this predicament. And also, we will not stop with this crusade until we have eradicated human trafficking in the state of South Carolina. Again, thank you to everyone for being here today. Thank you to our friends in the media for covering this. We appreciate you telling the stories of so many heroes up here today. At this time, I'm happy to take any questions, or we can make people up here available to all of you who want to do a sidebar interview.
Attorney General Wilson, what do you make of the fact that over the last couple of years, as you had said, the number of victims has gone up? I know you also said the number of calls to the hotline went up, but what do you make of that?
Well, I tell people it would be like if we took all of the law enforcement officers off the public roads. That doesn't mean there's no speeding, right? I think there's a combination of things. We have more resources out there, like putting more cops on the road, so more eyeballs, more people paying attention. We also have education initiatives that are promoting public awareness of this. As I used to say years ago, people would think of human trafficking as something that they watched in a Hollywood movie. Right, it happens in a far-off land or in a major metropolitan city, but and it usually involves people in ski masks and vans kidnapping you and taking you off to Europe or Asia or somewhere. What we realize is that that myth got busted. Human trafficking happens on Main Street here in South Carolina. It usually happens with close friends or family members, relatives, someone that knows the victim. And as people become more aware, another group of people are becoming more aware of this crime, and that's victims of human trafficking. I've actually spoken to victims of human trafficking who did not know they were a victim of human trafficking. Usually they were slow-boiled into this lifestyle. Maybe it started off as prostitution or selling drugs, and then of course their handler, the trafficker, slowly groomed them or got them into this lifestyle, and a lot of times they did it voluntarily, but the second that they decided they wanted out of the lifestyle, they realized they didn't have an option. They didn't have that choice. And so I think as awareness in this population goes up, people who are involved in the lifestyle, people are becoming aware of it, people who are seeing the conduct and activity out there are becoming aware of it, people are aware of the resources, the hotlines, the law enforcement agencies, the nonprofit organizations, the task force, the subcommittees, the sub-task force, and the regional task force are becoming aware of this, and they're reaching out and they're reporting what they see. Now, sometimes the reports don't bear out to be anything other than you saw something suspicious. But the fact that people are calling and reporting is good. We can't be all the eyes in the state. We need everyone in South Carolina to own this problem with us. And so that's what I attribute the uptick in the number of reports you're seeing, especially from victims.
And you mentioned the education initiatives. I think last year you mentioned that in 2022 you were going to be kicking off prevention education initiative for year-round opportunities for young people to become more aware. What's the status of that? How is that going?
Do y'all?
I'm happy to answer
you want to answer that? This is our Catherine Moorhead, the state executive director for the state task force.
Thank you, sir. In 2022, the state task force began efforts to increase prevention education across South Carolina. The staff that were newly onboarded have received training in different curricula, and we are in the process of hiring 2 prevention education coordinators. One will be working with mainstream schools and after-school programs, youth groups. The other will be working with system-involved youth, those that are have increased vulnerabilities.
Yes, sir.
About what rehabilitation looks like for someone that's rescued from a situation like this, like how do they move forward after?
Who wants to take that? Does someone on the task force want to take it, or?
Kat, you want to speak to that?
Sure.
Kat, would you like to come up here? Kat's on our advisory council.
Hi, my name's Kat Hunt. I would say that rehabilitation is a really hard and long process. So often exiting the exploitive situation is hard, but the real work begins at that point, right? Healing trauma recovery, navigating social services. It takes a lot of work and a lot of different organizations and people to make it happen and to make sure that survivors have all the good things this life has to offer. So it's a multidisciplinary approach, and it takes a lot of people working together for a long time alongside survivors.
Tell them your position, what your role is.
Yeah, I'm the co-chair of the Survivor Advisory Subcommittee.
So we have survivors who are advising us based on their experiences and experiences of people they have worked with, and that is invaluable to help us understand. I saw you, then you.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about some of the signs of human trafficking, just so people that they know when to report. What are some of the main signals to report incidents of human trafficking?
So a lot of the signs of human trafficking be the signs of any other thing. You know, you see people who are acting out of character. Maybe they're abusing alcohol or drugs or narcotics at some point. People are engaging in harmful behavior, disruptive behavior. That could be any number of things, but it's usually a symptom of something far deeper, and you have to start peeling that onion, peeling back the layers to get to the heart of it. You know, I've heard a lot of anecdotal stories, and I think anecdotal stories are the greatest way to illustrate, because there's no like magic formula or algorithm that says if you see this, this, and this, it equals human trafficking. But I'll give you an anecdotal, and this is a national anecdote. Years ago, flight attendant on a plane, serving drinks, you know, and taking care of people, and the flight attendant sees this older gentleman not a gentleman, an older man, and a young woman sitting there. The young woman was not making eye contact. She was being very surly. Whenever she would ask for the girl, the man would answer for her. The girl wouldn't make eye contact with anybody, wouldn't speak unless spoken to. The flight attendant thought that was a little bit of odd behavior. And so when she saw the young woman get up to go to the lavatory on the plane, she left a sticky note in there saying, "Are you okay? Is everything okay?" And the young girl went in the lavatory, came out. The flight attendant went into the lavatory, saw that the young woman had indicated on the note that she was not okay, that she was being flown across the country, and I don't know exactly what the note said, but it indicated that she was being trafficked. And so they were able to get the pilots to call ahead. They were able to meet the plane right there at the jet bridge and arrest that guy, and that's exactly what it ended up being. But that flight attendant, just recognizing behavior, talking to a pastor a year or two ago, said he saw a young woman here in Columbia who was sitting in the car. A guy went into the store And while he was in the store, the young woman kept making direct eye contact with the pastor. And my pastor friend said at one point the young woman breathed heavy on the glass and wrote help on the glass. And of course he called the police as the car was pulling out, never knew what happened. But those are anecdotal stories. Does anyone else want to give an anecdote or a thought on how to recognize activity? We can do it off.
General, something that's been brought to my attention.
Why don't you come up here and so they can hear you on the microphone? We want to make sure that if it's valuable information, it's captured. Introduce yourself.
My name's Rick Berry. I've just been asked to join the task force as a co-chair of a faith-based arena. A lot of times pastors come to know about this kind of thing, but they put a shame on it and they try to handle it internally. They try to provide counseling and that kind of thing. What we want to try and do is provide an arena where it's okay to report what you're worried about. Mandated reporting is out there, but it doesn't always work. If folks know that the task force is here, that we're friendly, that they don't have to go on record as making that report, that's part of the education process, and part of what we're trying to do on the faith-based initiative is to get that word out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And one last thought on that is, and others here with far more experience and exposure to this than me will probably say something else, but I want to, a lot of people, families I've talked to that have dealt with a loved one who they believe was being trafficked, is they saw a slow erosion of the relationship. In other words, that person slowly just started to cut them out of their life, started to distance themselves, and they would not have access or be able to locate or find or communicate with that person because of how the trafficker or the boyfriend or whatever relationship that person had with the victim. It would slowly just kind of cull them out of their family and out of the society's web, and that way they can totally manipulate them. So that happens as well. Yes, ma'am. As I said before, and don't know what I don't know, but I believe, as I said earlier, that I believe the metrics indicate awareness as more than activity. Obviously, there's activity. That doesn't mean there's not activity not going on in another surrounding county. It just means that more people are aware. In urban areas, you're probably going to have a lot more attention, a lot more focus, which is why we have to spend a lot of time in the rural areas. I think you see a lot of this activity in rural areas, but because everything is rural and it's more spread out, you don't see as much of a focus on it. We're working to fix that, but in places like Greenville, when you have the I-85 corridor, remember, the I-85 corridor goes from Atlanta to Charlotte. Those are two top 20 human trafficking hubs in this country. And so you see the I-85 corridor, you see the I-95 corridor, you see areas where there's a lot of tourism, a lot of sporting events. I mean, there are certain areas in the state where you're going to see a hub of that, and you're going to see that a lot more activity. So you're going to have a lot more eyeballs in an urbanized area as opposed to a rural area. You're not going to see condensed activity, and so it's going to be easier to see, easier to spot, and chances are there's going to be more awareness of it because of the focus of media and things of what we're doing. Obviously, we want to change that and get into the more rural areas. Absolutely. Make sure you identify.
My name is Heather Pagan. I'm with Lighthouse for Life. And it goes back to the whole thing that we push in education. See something, say something. It's better to say something and be wrong than not have said anything and would have been right. So again, it goes back to making those calls, and then allowing the proper people to figure that out. And so I think that's another reason why education just keeps going, and we need that. So therefore, people are saying something regardless of what their opinion is on it.
Good point. Thank you. We could be here all day, guys, because this is a very complicated crime, and every year we know more that we didn't know the year before, and that's the benefit of diversifying our task force, branching it out, funding it, supporting it. Again, our legislators, we have one here today, Senator Shealy. Where is she? She just stepped out. Katrina Shealy. Y'all make sure you let her know I said nice things about her. If we didn't have leadership in the General Assembly supporting us, and there's so many others, the Speaker, leadership in the Senate, very supportive of our efforts, and so they're the ones that are giving us the funding to actually do these outreaches, which is why you're seeing more reports, and you're going to see more data, more statistics, and more engagement by law enforcement and nonprofit organizations. So we could keep going, but I do feel like I need to close down, but we'll make some people available. I'm happy to do a sidebar.